Eric Zond is with us, Platte County prosecuting attorney. Eric, you are the past president of the Missouri Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. Thanks for joining us, and welcome back to KTRS Radio.
Hey, glad to be with you again, McCulloch.
You got it. So, everyone has an opinion on what Bob McCulloch did and said yesterday. What's yours?
I think Bob did exactly the right thing. I think taking this case to the grand jury was the right thing to do, and we know that lots of people are going to disagree with those grand jurors' decisions, but we have to respect the process. 12 grand jurors looked at this case, and 9 of them were not able to agree that probable cause existed to charge Officer Wilson with a felony.
The national media has parachuted in, stood on a corner in Ferguson, and told us how terrible St. Louis is, including how wrong Bob McCulloch is for presenting all of the facts and not stacking the deck to, quote-unquote, indict a ham sandwich.
You know, here's the thing. Bob McCulloch was damned if he did, damned if he didn't. First it was Bob McCulloch shouldn't handle this case because his father was killed many, many years ago as a police officer. Then when we find out it's going to a grand jury, it's Bob McCulloch shouldn't take this case to a grand jury. He should decide it himself. And then when we find out he's going to present the grand jury with all of the evidence, good and bad, it's, oh my gosh, he shouldn't do that. He should ask them and tell them what he wants them to do. The fact of the matter is we've got the media elite trying to run the criminal justice system, and it doesn't work that way. The reality of this case is it happened exactly the way it should have. We took 12 citizens who had already been meeting, weren't chosen for this specific case, but 12 citizens who became the conscience of the community. We gave them all of the facts, all of the evidence, and let them come to a conclusion. They did that, and I understand not everybody's going to agree with that decision, but it's critical that we maintain peace and order and calm. What happened last night is not the sort of reflection we want on St. Louis or the state of Missouri.
So one of the criticisms of the grand jury is that Officer Wilson was able to testify for 4 hours and was not cross-examined. Is there any is there any validity to that criticism? He was able to tell his story the way he wanted to tell the story.
Sure, he got to tell his story, and many, many, many other witnesses who had a very different opinion than Officer Wilson also told their stories. So this grand jury got to hear from everybody. Now, is it very dramatic when a grand jury hears from the target of a grand jury investigation? It is, because it happens very rarely. But that's a sign to me, and I've been doing this for a long time, I will tell you that the defendants who have something to hide rarely speak to grand juries. And the fact that Officer Wilson came forward and talked, I'm sure did have an impact on this grand jury. But they heard from 3 different medical examiners. They saw the forensic evidence. They heard from numerous other eyewitnesses to what happened that day. And again, not everybody's going to agree with that decision, but we need to respect the rule of law.
You know, we heard from a lot of witnesses on air. They were interviewed prior to this grand jury and giving their account. And Bob McCulloch spent a lot of time last night talking about the unreliability of many of those eyewitnesses and how their statements changed. So it seems like it was really important for him to lay that out and let the public know about that, too.
Well, there's no doubt that some eyewitness testimony in this case can be set aside because it simply is not squared up with the physical evidence of this case. And as Bob said last night, the physical evidence doesn't change. People's memories are malleable. People are subject to public opinion and changing their opinions based on what they hope the outcome might be. But that doesn't happen with the physical evidence. So there's some of that eyewitness testimony that we can immediately discredit because it just doesn't square up with the forensic evidence in the case.
So we had a legal analyst on not too long ago, and he said that he, reading between the lines, thought that Bob McCulloch agreed with the grand jury. Do you think he agreed with the grand jury? Did he tip his hand, or was he just trying to explain how they came to their conclusion?
Yeah, I think he was just trying to explain the conclusions that the grand jury came to. Now, I will tell you this. I think really all of us ought to agree with the grand jury in this respect. at this point, and we're getting a chance to look at the evidence that they've looked at now, but I don't think any of us have had the time and the ability to look at all of the evidence this grand jury has seen. So I'm not going to second guess this grand jury, at least until I get a chance to see the evidence myself. And while I've seen bits and pieces of it as it's begun to come out over the last 12 hours or so, I have had very little time myself to look at it. And my guess is a lot of these people who are being very critical of the process haven't spent any time looking at the evidence that the grand jury spent many, many months sifting through.
So one of the criticisms and one of the arguments is that he should have gone to the judge, and the judge would have heard the evidence from both sides, have a mini trial, and then decide. As opposed, he decided to go with the grand jury because this was so high profile, because there was so much pressure, because there was so much volatility. He took it out of the hands of a judge who certainly could have ruled or been swayed by political pressure one way or the other, because we've certainly seen that with the officials in this case. And instead, he took it to 12 people who aren't running for office, who don't have a public reputation to uphold, aren't trying to raise money for some other, aren't looking for votes. 12 complete strangers, unknown to us, who decided it. It seems to me that that's more or less much more fair than going to a judge.
Oh, I agree with you 100%, McGraw. We are a nation of the people, by the people, and for the people. And bringing in those 12 people who can be a check on not only the legislative, not only the executive, but also the judicial branch, I think is the purest form of government. I'm a strong believer in not only the jury system for ultimately deciding guilt and innocence, but also in the grand jury system to decide whether somebody ought to be charged with a crime in the first place.
I mean, you could have gotten a judge who was a law and order judge. You could have gotten a liberal judge who, right? I mean, you sort of, depending on whatever judge you get, then the case goes to trial, and that seems to play that political game. So
there's no doubt that there are judges who have political bents, and as you say, taking 12 people from the community who, by the way, weren't picked by Bob McCulloch. They were picked originally by a judge. But those 12 people are going to have very different opinions, very different ways of approaching the world. As we know, they were diverse both by gender and by race. And bringing those 12 people together and hearing their collective wisdom, I believe, is a really good thing.
One question. A lot of people are questioning why he released it at 8 o'clock at night. Do you have any thoughts on why he did it? Was it wrong? Was it good? Was it bad?
The timing of these things is really, really difficult. As we know, the grand jury didn't finish its work until Monday. Keeping a lid on things in this case has been very, very difficult. I think it would be unreasonable to believe that you would have been able to maintain the secrecy of what the grand jury's decision was through the night. But there are also preparations that have to be made after the grand jury has come back and made its decision. And my belief is, and I've not talked about this, but my belief is that Bob probably made that announcement as quickly as he could after the other authorities were able to get their preparations in place.
Platte County prosecuting attorney, former past president of the Missouri Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, Eric Zod. Eric, thank you very much for your time on a busy morning.
McGraw, Kelly, great to be with you.
You got it.
Thank you.
8:45. Lieutenant Governor Peter Kinder has been tweeting out some things this morning. We'll find out the backstory on that coming up next.